Hello, I'm Katherine Stansfield. I'm a poet and novelist. I'm living in Cardiff these days, but I grew up in Cornwall on Bodmin Moor. I always wanted to write. I think so. I don't remember a time when I wasn't writing. Um, from my earliest memories, I was always writing something and reading too. I was a voracious reader as a child, and I think that inevitably had a big impact on my interest in writing. Um, I used to love doing writing exercises at school. You know, if we had to write little poems or stories as part of classwork, I absolutely loved doing that. It was my most favourite thing ever. And I was always keen to volunteer to read my piece to the class. So I obviously got a lot from that. It's quite precocious, as a lot of writers often are. And that continued really. I suppose I took it a bit more seriously when I was a teenager, as again a lot of writers do, and I wrote a lot of really terrible poetry as a teenager, really dreadful stuff. But I got a lot from it in terms of not only being able to express myself, to say things that perhaps I was struggling to articulate, as a lot of teenagers are in that kind of maelstrom of emotion, but I also had a very strong imagination, and I found that writing was a way to get down all the kind of things that were swirling through my head, or the imagined worlds I was coming up with, or the imaginative way I was seeing the world in which I lived. So I never stopped writing really. I went to university when I was 19, Aberystwyth University, to study English and writing, and I loved it. You know, it was absolutely fantastic to spend all my time reading, talking about books, writing, learning, you know, a huge amount, and spending all my time with other people who took writing seriously. You know, it was fantastic. And I realised when I was there on the course that perhaps I wasn't that bad at it either. You know, it wasn't just that I really liked it, but that people seemed interested in not only what I had to say, but how I had to say it, I suppose. And I've never looked back really. So writing has always been part of my life, fiction and poetry equally, although I sort of started out as a poet. And my whole life is books and board games, as you can see behind me. Um, where I grew up, Cornwall, where I spent my formative years, um, has always been very important in my writing. I think in part it's because I started writing seriously, taking it more seriously once I'd left there. So once I'd gone to university in Wales, that was when I really committed to writing. And, you know, from then on, I've spent a lot of my creative energy writing about Cornwall, particularly the area where I'm from, North Cornwall, on Bodmin Moor. I'm interested in its history and its folklore, its landscape, particularly its crazy kind of geological makeup. Um, I can't seem to stop writing about it really. You know, I write about it in fiction as well as poetry. And I think that is in part because I don't live there anymore. I think it's that gives me what is for me personally some important perspective on the place. But it's also a way of staying connected to a place that's very important to me. I think that's why it features so much in my work, and that's true of my latest book. which is this new poetry collection, We Could Be Anywhere by Now, which is published by Seren books. It's just come out. And what this book does, in these poems, I explore kind of for the first time really my relationship with Wales, and the idea of moving to Wales from Cornwall, and what I learnt about Cornwall as a place and also the Cornish language through living in Wales, which of course is a bilingual nation, and the politicised nature of language, and languages that have to fight to to survive, really, and what it means to fight for a language and to defend a language, or not to do so, and where we might position ourselves in different languages and in places which use different languages, and how we speak ourselves in those places. So that's what this book kind of talks about, but that kind of sounds a bit dry and stuffy, but there's also a lot about journeys and travel in this book. Lots of train journeys, the kind of strange things that people will say on trains, and those kind of liminal spaces, I suppose, but the space between the places that we're going to, and the stories that we tell each other on the way. So as well as writing, I do a lot of teaching and mentoring, like a lot of writers, to keep myself going. My main job is I teach for the Open University, so I'm an associate lecturer on the MA in creative writing run by the Open University, which is a wonderful job. I really, really enjoy it. It's a distance learning MA, so it means I work from home all the time, not just in lockdown, and I can teach in my pyjamas, which is obviously wonderful. So that's my main job, but I also do a lot of teaching and mentoring in the Cardiff area. So I teach courses for the Lifelong Learning Department at Cardiff University. Those are primarily fiction at the moment. So I teach writing crime fiction, and I'm going to be teaching novel writing as well. I really, really enjoy that work. I'm really committed to lifelong learning as a sector, further education. I'm also a mentor for Literature Wales, which means that I work one-on-one with writers who've been awarded mentoring from Literature Wales. That's often working with new writers who are building towards their first book. So I will support them as they kind of hone their craft, as they shape their work, but also helping them think about putting a book together, about the idea of a book length project, how to keep going, how to stay motivated, but also how to conceptualize their projects, and then also that sort of tricky road to publication. So I help with things like covering letters and synopses, and getting a bit more confident perhaps about thinking about yourself as a writer. So that tricky transition between having committed to writing seriously, and it being personally important, to actually getting your first book out in the world, and that's a really hard, torturous business, and I think it can make a world of difference to have somebody in your corner who's rooting for you, who can just help you out with anything that seems like a stumbling block, because it's so easy at that point to lose your way, or decide your writing's not good enough, or you don't know what you're doing, or it's not for you. So I'm there to kind of support writers in Wales to keep going. That's the main thing. I also do a bit of private mentoring as well, and in fact my whole life when I'm not writing is I'm working with other writers, and I've always found that hugely inspiring and stimulating. I get a huge amount from it for my own creative practice, but I also find it very cheering, because I'm surrounding myself with other people who believe that writing is important, and who value the act of writing and communicating in the way that I do, which often is a kind of lonely, bizarre, impoverishing career. So actually, it's quite helpful to surround yourself with other people who agree to do such a silly thing as writing. I love it. Has the experience of living in Wales influenced my writing? Yes, massively. In ways I think I'm only just coming to understand after a long time living in Wales, getting on for sort of 18 years now. I think that the community of writers in Wales, whether that be in Aberystwyth in Mid Wales, where I lived for a long time, now in South Wales, has been invaluable in helping me keep going and feel part of a group of people who care about writing, care about books, care about helping other writers get their work out there and make sure their voice is heard. That sense of community, I wonder if it's in part because it's a small nation, so it's a supportive smaller community. It's harder to feel lost here than it would be on a bigger stage, possibly. I think also the poetic tradition in Wales is so sort of fundamental, that being a poet here doesn't seem a kind of mad thing to do. It's seen as a, a culturally important role, and that makes a really big difference in terms of thinking like, actually, yes, I'm going to give my time to this art form, and I'm going to contribute to this and be part of this. And I've always felt really welcomed as a writer here in Wales, and there are so many fantastic people doing fantastic work here. It's an incredibly innovating place to work as a creative person, and I mean that in Wales more broadly, not just in Cardiff where I am. So I think Wales has had a huge impact in terms of actually just making me a writer. And my first book was published in Wales. My first novel was published by Parthian in 2013, and Seren have published all my poetry books to date, another Welsh publisher. So from the outset, my publishing career, it was established in Wales. And it's also a place where language is so important, is political, is part of everything. And I think that as a poet, that's bound to have an effect on you. And I think that I found that very fruitful, living in a bilingual country. So in terms of what I'm working on at the moment, I since finishing this new poetry collection, which was sort of 6 to 7 years in the making, so not a swift poet by any means. I've taken my foot off the gas a little bit with poetry, and I've been working on fiction projects because I've been on contract for novels. So I have a new novel which I had to deliver to my publisher in September this year. So I've been hard at work on that. That's a fantasy series that I co-write with my partner. So that's taken up a lot of my time, really, and a lot of kind of creative energy. So once that's kind of signed off, I've got a kind of strange memoir, half memoir, half travel journal, half what on earth, well, third, what on earth is this, that I started work on a few years ago, and it's very, very rough. I don't really know what it is as a book. I think it could be quite interesting, reworked. So I've got this prose narrative that I'm thinking of turning into something a bit more hybrid, maybe a work of prose poems. So that I'm kind of excited about. I can't think about it too much yet because I've got too many other things to do. But come the autumn, that's where my kind of creative energies will be on thinking about this kind of memoir and looking at working in a new form, something that's kind of halfway between my novel writing and my poetry, which is a bit scary but very exciting as well. So that's my next thing.